Hello again, my name is Jesse Matthews. I am the Local 4094 Reserve Committee Chairperson based here in Vancouver. This is my beginner's guide to doing 100 hours on reserve, otherwise known as VE or voluntary extension. 100 hours isn't a term you'll hear so much, but that's technically what people are referring to when they're talking about VE. Little disclaimer, as always, before we continue, this is a presentation for educational purposes only. If there is anything at odds in this presentation with the collective agreement will always take precedence. If you have any questions about different parts of the collective agreement or any interpretation from within it, including in this presentation, you can feel free to reach out to your local union officers or ultimately to the component president who has the final say in interpreting any part of the collective agreement. And with that, let's go into our guide. So we'll start with an overview of voluntary extension. So what are we talking about when we're talking about voluntary extension? What we're saying is that instead of the 80 hours for our limitation for a block month or a reserve block month, we are willing to go all the way up to 100 hours instead on a voluntary basis. A submission to do voluntary extension is always going to be due by 10 a.m. At your local home base's time, and this needs to be at least one calendar day prior to any of the desired days on which you'd like to do VE. VE is paid over and above your minimum monthly guarantee on reserve of $75. You can do VE on your RDOs only, and this is after all of your reserve duty days have been completed in the block month. Consequently, that means it is not possible to do VE on your GDOs or on your vacation days. Crew scheduling cannot call you for any reason during the first 12 hours of your crew rest when you've completed a pairing. This includes calling you for VE. So in these circumstances, this is one of the only times where it's actually okay to call crew scheduling actively during the awards to see about your eligibility for a pairing. They do still have to call in pairing order, but in this rare circumstance, when you call in, you can see where they're at with the calling list, and then they'll usually have you call back within a certain time frame. It's not perfect, but this is generally the way where your crew rest is still honored as per the collective agreement and where you still have a chance to get VE like everyone else who isn't on crew rest. All VE is awarded in seniority order. There is, of course, requirements for language. In some cases, there are block rules that still have to be observed as far as completion of crew rest, as far as VE occurring only on RDOs, or if it overlaps into the next block month, it will also need to conclude before your next set of available duty days. One item of note as well that comes up semi-regularly, if departure time for a pairing is within 6 hours, the pairing can be given to VE or to reserve in general, and that's entirely at crew scheduling's discretion. There's no hard and fast rule for this. Whatever suits them best as far as the operation is concerned, it is acceptable when it's within 6 hours. If the pairing departs more than 6 hours from the current time, then it is assumed to be going to VE first as per the order of awards. just to give you an example of where you could list for VE. I've already done so in my schedule for November on these 3 days. That's the 28th, 29th, and 30th. The one other available day is the 20th. I have not yet listed for this day, but that would be the last remaining day for which I am eligible. The reason why I'm not eligible on the 18th and 19th is that they are GDOs, and as previously discussed, those are not days in which one is eligible for VE. Similarly, I have vacation for this entire week starting on the 21st all the way to the 27th, so I am not eligible for VE on those days either. You'll notice that I do have other days off that are RDOs earlier in the month, but I am not eligible for doing VE on these days because I still have duty days left to complete. That would be the call-in days on the 6th through the 9th, and then the ready reserve days on the 12th through the 17th. So the 20th is an RDO just before my vacation, and I am able to list for VE on those days. So to list, I would end up clicking on this button here that says List MUVEDR. Those refer to Makeup, Voluntary Extension, and Draft, respectively. On Reserve, we don't list voluntarily for draft. We are just simply drafted if it is needed by crew scheduling. Makeup is similarly a concept that just exists for block holders. We don't have the option to make up a reserve block. So it's just VE would be the option out of the 3 that's available. So to bid for voluntary extension, it's fairly straightforward. I've taken a screenshot, in fact, just because it's relatively straightforward. You'll notice that makeup is not available, as discussed, because we're on a block. Similar, or not in a block, pardon. Similar with draft, we're not in a block. So what can we do? We can ask crew scheduling to call us about specific types of VE. So there's overseas, that's what OS stands for. Asia, LO is layover, layover in Canada, layover in the US, layover in Canada downtown only, layover in the US downtown only, short turnaround in the morning, short turnaround in the evenings. Those are what we would call turns. So say a flight to Calgary and back from Vancouver, or a flight to Montreal and back from Toronto. Long turnaround would be longer turns, so that would be, say, a day turn from Toronto to Calgary and back. That would be considered a longer turnaround. All-night flight turn, for those of you in Toronto, you'll be familiar with these, in particular for the late night turns from Toronto to St. John's, Newfoundland and back. Continuous duty overnight, operating one way only, so that would mean that there is a deadhead involved for one of the legs. And then wide body only, if your preference is just to work on wide body aircraft. You can also customize your VE bid for position on the aircraft. By default, FA only is selected. So if you are interested in bidding for a galley position, you will need to switch the radio button. There is a radio button for galley position only if all that you want to do is galley. There is also an option to bid for both flight attendant and for galley, if that is what you so desire. Additionally, you can put in preferences for destinations that you would like to go to, or you can specify destinations to avoid being awarded. You can only do one or the other. So you can say which destinations you would like to be awarded, or you can say which ones you would not like to be awarded. So in the case of my bid, as an example here, I've asked crew scheduling to call me about overseas and to call me about any sort of US layover. That could be downtown or it could be an airport US layover. I have no preference based on this bid. For both of those, I have specified only London and only Los Angeles as far as destinations I would like to be called for. So if there aren't overseas pairings or US layovers available for London or Los Angeles, I don't want to be called. And I've also got flight attendant only, so if it were a galley position that were open for the London, for example, then I would not be called for that. Fairly straightforward. Once you've finished specifying your preferences for VE, you would hit the submit button here, and then that would be put in with a similar blue line underneath as we saw for the other 3 days that I have already put in my VE bid for. So let's talk about several of the most frequently asked questions about VE. So one of them is, how is my VE pairing credited for an overlap pairing? So VE could be all self-contained within the same block month, or it could overlap into the next block month. So if it's within the same block month, so let's just say I was awarded a pairing that departed on the 28th and got back on the 29th, and that was it. In that case, all of the VE credit would be applied to this block month. In this case, this is November. So it would be assigned entirely to November. There's no complication there. However, if I were assigned a pairing that departs on, say, the 30th, and then extends all the way into December on the 1st, then we have ourselves an overlap pairing situation. So within the collective agreement, we have a letter of understanding, LOU 16, and that covers any scenario regarding which block month or block months flight credit is assigned to. It's all based on departure times, as in scheduled departure times, for each of the legs involved in the pairing. It also involves check-in times and check-out times, just because it is possible, as we see with deli pairings, for example, for check-in to be on one given day and then for the flight itself to be on a different given day. If credit for your VE pairing is inbound, then it will only count towards your 75 for the block month. What is meant by inbound would be flight credit that comes into the block month. So let's just erase the board here. If I got a VE pairing that was back in October that came into November, then that would be an overlap coming into my November block month. Let's just make it really easy and say it was a London. So on the 30th of October, I flew to London, let's say, and then on the 1st of November, I flew back to Vancouver. So November the 1st is part of the November block month. The leg coming back from London to Vancouver would then get awarded to my credit for the November block month, but it would be regular credit. So it would go towards my 75. And that's because it's credit being brought in from the previous block month. Consequently, outbound flight credit is paid over and above one's minimum monthly guarantee. So let's erase the board again. Let's say it's at the end of November. that I get that London pairing. So let's just say that it starts on the 30th and goes all the way to December the 2nd. So for the leg that departs on the 30th, this is still part of the November block month. So that leg would be paid over and above the minimum monthly guarantee. So in that case, 75 would be paid first, and then whatever the pairing credit is going outbound, that is the leg that goes out towards London in this case, that would be paid over and above the 75. So from Vancouver, that's approximately 9 hours. So it would be 75 plus an additional 9 hours, and that would make for 84 hours of pay. This is something that you will likely need to check on your pay statement because of what we're going to see on the next slide as a frequently asked question. Why is Globe showing the wrong amount of projected hours? And for this question, it's because Globe will sometimes show the actual projected hours flown versus your minimum monthly guarantee plus your voluntary extension. So I've included a screenshot from one of my previous block months as an example of how this works. In this case, you are seeing 58.35 as far as my projected hours, and you are seeing MML of 100, which is above the usual 80 that we have for a block month. So in this block month, I did not fly my minimum hours of 75, and then I flew a VE pairing in this block month. So what Globe will sometimes do is just combine the actual hours that you flew and then your VE hours, and it will put them all together as your projected hours. Because it was true, the actual hours that I flew in this block month were totaled up to 58 hours and 35 minutes, but a fraction of those actual hours flown were VE hours. So what you see in your Globe does not necessarily reflect how many hours you'll be paid, but rather how many hours you've flown. If your MML is showing 100 like it does for me here, then your pairing has very likely been correctly encoded as a VE pairing, but all the same, you should still check your flight summary once it is posted to ensure that it has been paid over and above your 75-hour minimum monthly guarantee.